Hello, my friends, and welcome to a new episode from English Plus Podcast. Today, we have a very special episode, and that's the beginning of a very long series, and this series is called The Long Shadow. But now, without further ado, let's start with what we're here to do. So, let's say you want to conquer the world. You want to pull off the biggest, most violent, most audacious smash and grab in all of human history. But you got a problem. You can't just tell people that's what you're doing. It's, bad PR. No, you need a story. You need a justification. You need an elaborate, high-minded, even holy quest to mask the reality. That is what we're talking about today. We're diving into the long, dark, and ridiculously complicated shadow of empires. And we're telling the story as the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're going to start with part 1, the good. And when I say good, I need you to visualize me making air quotes so vast they have their own weather systems. This is not good as in moral. This is the good as in the justification. This is the philosophy of the civilizing mission. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, it's going to take some time. We're about to dissect the official PR campaign for global domination. We're going to start with part 1, the good, the justification, the philosophy of colonialism. I'm Danny, and this is a new episode from English Plus Podcast. Now, when I say the good, I need you to visualize me making air quotes so vast that they have their own weather systems. I already said that, right? But just because it is very important. This is not good as in moral or kind. Or hey, that was nice of you. This is the good as in the story, the justification, the PR campaign. This is the elaborate, often contradictory, and frankly wild set of stories that empires told themselves and told the world to make what was essentially the biggest, most violent smash and grab in human history look like a noble, high-minded, even holy quest. This is the philosophy of the civilizing mission. It's the ultimate, it's not you, it's me being better than you for your own good argument. And oh boy, did they commit to the bit. Now we're going to spend all our time today just sitting with this. With the why. Not the real why. Obviously, that's money, power, resources, the usual. We're talking about the fancy why. The why they taught in their universities, preached from their pulpits, and wrote in their poems. So let's get into the first and most powerful justification. The divine and destined mandate. Okay, first up, the all-time classic. The heavyweight champion of all justifications. Undefeated for millennia. God told me to. It's simple, it's clean, it's unarguable. Who are you, a mere mortal, to argue with the divine mandate? The good claim here is just that we are acting on divine will. We are the agents of providence. Our expansion is not conquest, it is the unfolding of a holy plan. It is a fantastic argument, really. It completely removes any moral responsibility. You're not stealing land, you're just the delivery guy for Jesus. The bad of it, the reality, is where the paperwork gets filed. And you better believe there was paperwork. My absolute favorite, the one that deserves to be in the Audacity Hall of Fame, is a little something called terra nullius. It's Latin, which makes it sound very important and smart, but it simply means nobody's land. Terra nullius. I want you just to sit with that for a second. Nobody's land. Imagine this. You and your buddies build a big boat. You sail across an entire ocean. You land on a massive continent. But that continent is full of people. Well, millions of them actually. They have complex societies, languages, legal systems, spiritual traditions, agriculture, trade routes, art, music, you name it. They have been there for 60,000 years with all that. And you step off the boat, plant a flag in the sand, and go, nobody here. Dibs. It's like walking into your neighbor's house while they're in the living room watching TV. You just walk past them into the kitchen, open the fridge, and start taking their food. And when they say, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" you just look at them, confused, and you say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize anyone lived here. You don't have this kitchen organized in the way I would organize it, so I just assumed it was, empty." Terra nullius was the legal and philosophical concept that unsettled or uncivilized land was available for the taking. And uncivilized conveniently meant not living exactly like a 15th century European. By deciding that their way of life was the only valid form of human civilization, they philosophically deleted entire continents of people. They were reclassified as part of the flora and fauna, not as human owners of the land. And if terra nullius was the quasi-legal argument, the doctrine of discovery was the full-on holy one. This wasn't some abstract idea. It was a series of papal bulls. Well, when we talk about bulls here, we're talking about edicts from the Pope, not the animal itself. That's what it's called in the 15th century. But you would wish these were actual bulls. Now, think about the power the Pope had. He was seen in Catholic Europe as God's representative on earth. And he issues these bulls, like Romanus Pontifex and Inter Caetera, and what do they say? I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty close. They say, "Hey, kings of Spain and Portugal, see any land out there not ruled by other Christians? Well, it's yours. Go get it. And the people on it? You have our divine permission to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to take away all their possessions and property while you're at it." Believe me, I'm not making that up. That's the actual text. It was a divine permission slip for genocide, enslavement, and grand theft auto on a global scale. It was the starting gun fired by Columbus. And you see, this is what makes it so insidious. It frames the most brutal acts of conquest as acts of piety. You're not slaughtering people, you're saving their souls. You're not stealing their land, you're bringing them into the light of Christ. It's the ultimate, "this hurts me more than it hurts you," as you're holding the branding iron. Now, this God's on our side idea gets a rebrand in 19th century America. It gets a catchy new name, and this one is called Manifest Destiny. This was the belief, coined by a journalist named John O'Sullivan, that American expansion across the entire continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific was not just a good idea, not just a strategic move, but inevitable. It was destined by God. It was manifest, obvious. This wasn't just God said we could, this was God wants us to. It's our sacred duty to spread our great experiment of liberty and federated self-government to all the poor, benighted peoples of the continent. This is the philosophy that justified the Trail of Tears, the forced removal of the Cherokee and other nations from their ancestral lands. It was the philosophy that justified the Mexican-American War, where the US took half of Mexico's territory. And they wrapped it in this beautiful, virtuous language. It wasn't a land grab, it was extending the area of freedom. It was a defensive move, really. O'Sullivan argued that if America didn't take these lands, the British or Spanish would, and that would be bad for freedom. So you see, we had to conquer them to protect them. And the ugly part? The consequence? This isn't just dusty history. This is the philosophical bedrock for centuries of policy. This is how you get genocide. This is how you get mass displacement. You can't commit these kinds of atrocities against people you see as your equals. You first have to have a story, a divined or destined mandate that says they don't count. And this story has legs. The legal argument of terra nullius was still being used to deny Aboriginal land rights in Australia until 1992. Yeah, 1992. That's not a long time ago, guys. The High Court of Australia finally overturned it in the Mabo decision, acknowledging that, yes, people were there first. A legal friction that stood for 200 years was finally, reluctantly put to bed. The shadow it cast? It's still here. Okay, so time moves on. We get into the 17th, 18th centuries, the age of reason. We're not superstitious peasants anymore. We have wigs. We have calculus. We have logic. We got science. The God told me to argument starts to feel a little, old-fashioned, a little thin. You can't just tell a guy in a powdered wig that you're conquering India for Jesus. He wants a rational argument. So the good claim shifts. It's not God told us to, it's we are bringing civilization. Well, this is the big one. We are bringing enlightenment, science, progress, medicine, and probably forks to all you backward peoples. It's a civilizing mission. It's for your own good. And this is where the philosophers we all had to read in college, the ones we think of as the good guys, get really, really complicated. Now, let's talk about the bad. Let's talk about John Locke. The man, the legend, the father of modern liberalism. The guy who basically invented the modern idea of individual rights. Life, liberty, and property. Sounds great, right? I like all three of those things. But let's look at his theory on property. In his second treatise of government, Locke argued that you come to own something in nature when you mix your labor with it. You pick an apple, it's yours. You catch a fish, it's yours. And crucially, you clear a patch of land, till the soil, and plant a crop, you have mixed your labor with it. And that land is now yours. Well, that sounds reasonable, right? I worked it, I own it. But what counts as labor? In Locke's mind, labor meant farming. Specifically, European-style settled agriculture. With fences. Lots and lots of fences. It's the philosophy of the fence. If you were, say, a hunter-gatherer society in North America that had a complex, sustainable, and highly effective relationship with a vast territory, in Locke's view, you weren't laboring. You were just using the land. Like the deer and the bears. You hadn't enclosed it. You hadn't improved it. Which means, oops, terra nullius all over again. Just with a rational gloss. It's unworked land, waste land, and it is therefore free for the taking by anyone who will come along and improve it by building a fence and planting some wheat. It is the most high-minded, influential, and powerful philosophical argument for mass-scale land theft ever conceived. And it was conceived by the guy who gave us life, liberty, and property. Well, the irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. And this wasn't just for export. They were practicing at home. The enclosure movement in England was doing the same thing, taking common lands that villages had used for centuries and enclosing them, turning peasants into landless workers. Locke's philosophy was the justification for creating a dispossessed class both at home and abroad. But okay, let's move on. Let's talk about John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill, the Titan of Liberty, the author of On Liberty, maybe the most important essay ever written on the value of free speech and individual freedom. Well, this guy is the patron saint of every debating club and college newspaper in the world. Well, guess what John Stuart Mill did for a living? He worked for the East India Company. Yes, the East India Company, quasi-governmental corporation that was, at the time, in the process of conquering, subjugating, and asset stripping the entire Indian subcontinent. Well, that was his day job. Talk about a conflict of interest. So how does the great champion of liberty square this? He squares it with a little idea called benevolent despotism. I'll say that again. Benevolent despotism. He argued, in all seriousness, that barbarians, and that's exactly his word, were just not ready for liberty. They were, in his view, like children or minors. And just as you don't give a child the same freedoms as an adult, you can't give a barbarian society the right to self-government. They needed a guiding, civilized hand, Britain's hand, to rule them. But it would be a benevolent dictatorship, you see. It would be for their own good. It would be a despotism that would teach them how to be civilized, how to be mature. And once they were mature enough, then they could have liberty. Now, the ugly part is that the graduation date for this maturity just never seemed to arrive. It was always just over the horizon. When will we be ready? The Indians would ask. And the answer from Mill and the colonial office was, we'll let you know. Now, don't call us, we'll call you sometime after never. Well, it's the most patronizing, condescending argument for perpetual rule ever devised. And this is when they brought in the science to back it all up. This is where it gets truly, truly disgusting. You get the birth of scientific racism. This wasn't just, those people look different. This was the full-throated, academic, scientific argument that humanity was divided into distinct biological races and that these races were hierarchically ranked. You get to guys like Johann Blumenbach, a German anatomist, who in the late 18th century comes up with his 5 races. He invents the term Caucasian for the white race. Why Caucasian? Because he had a skull from the Caucasus Mountains that he thought was particularly beautiful. I'm not kidding. His entire scientific ranking was based on his aesthetic judgment of which skulls were the prettiest. And shocker, he put Caucasian at the very top as the pinnacle of human development. Then you get guys like Arthur de Gobineau, a French aristocrat who wrote an essay on the inequality of the human races. This guy was the father of modern racial theory. He argued, scientifically, if we can say that the Aryan race was superior to all others and that the mixing of races, miscegenation, was the sole cause of the decline and fall of all great civilizations. This book, by the way, became a huge favorite of a certain Austrian fellow a few decades later. The ideas had legs. My friends, this wasn't fringe. This was mainstream science. They developed phrenology and craniometry, which is the science of measuring skulls and the bumps on people's heads. That's what it was. They would literally publish scientific papers with calipers and charts, proving that the skulls of Europeans had a larger capacity for intellect and moral reasoning, while the skulls of Africans or Aboriginals were, closer to the ape. Sorry to say that, but that's the truth. You can look it up if you don't believe me. It is the most grotesque, vile pseudoscience, and it's hilarious to read about now until you remember that this was the evidence used to justify slavery. This was the data used to justify dispossession. This was the proof that these people weren't fully human, and therefore the civilizing mission was, in fact, a noble burden. You mix all this into a toxic stew with social Darwinism. This is Herbert Spencer's baby, not Darwin's. Now, let's be very clear about that. Darwin was talking about finches on the Galapagos. Spencer, philosopher, took Darwin's natural selection and applied it very wrongly to human societies. It was Spencer, not Darwin, who coined the phrase survival of the fittest. This was the ultimate get out of jail free card for the rich, the powerful, and the imperial. The argument was, why are we on top? Because we are the fittest. Why are you at the bottom? Because you are unfit. Why is our nation ruling your nation? Because we are the fitter race. It's not conquest. It's not theft. It's not immoral. It's just evolution. It's nature taking its course. In fact, to help the poor or to not conquer the weaker nations would be to interfere with nature's plan. It is the most brutal, cold, and scientific justification for cruelty ever invented. It washes all the blood off and replaces it with a clean, sterile lab coat wearing fact of life. So you've got your divine permission slip from God, and you've got your scientific justification from your skull-measuring academics. But you still have to live with this. How do you, day to day, rule over millions of people you are actively exploiting, stealing from, and when they object, violently suppressing? How do you get your own people, your average citizens back home, to be okay with this? You do it through culture. You do it through dehumanization. You have to create the other. This is the soft power part of the colonial engine. It's the cultural and intellectual project that runs alongside the military and economic one. The good claim here was we are just studying these fascinating exotic cultures. We are anthropologists, linguists, artists, writers. We find them enchanting. The bad of it, the intellectual and cultural tool, was a concept that a brilliant Palestinian-American scholar named Edward Said would much later formally diagnose and name Orientalism. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about Said in part 2, but he's the one who exposed the whole game. The concept of Orientalism is what we're dissecting here. Said showed that for centuries, the West, the Occident, had invented a fictional place called the Orient, the East. This Orient was a single, monolithic, magical place. It stretched all the way from Morocco to Japan, apparently, and was all basically the same. And this Orient was defined by always being the opposite of the rational, civilized, progressive West. How did they do this? Well, through art. Think of the big, famous 19th century paintings. Think of Eugène Delacroix's Women of Algiers. Think of Jean-Léon Gérôme's The Snake Charmer. What are the tropes? You always see the languid harem women. Half-naked, sensual, available, but also a bit debased. You see the violent turbaned men with their scimitars prone to irrational fits of rage. You see the dusty, timeless marketplaces that look like they haven't changed in 1,000 years, implying this is a place outside of history, backward, static. It's a fantasy. It's a stage set. Jerome's Snake Charmer? It's a painting of a boy in Istanbul, in a room with tiles from Egypt, in front of an audience of men from all over the Orient, as they called it. It's a fantasy collage, but it was presented as realism. This is what the East is like. And literature? Oh, the literature. We can't talk about this and not talk about Rudyard Kipling, the great poet of the British Empire. And let's talk about his most famous, most damning poem, The White Man's Burden. The good claim is right there in the title. It is a burden. It's a sacrifice. It's this awful, thankless job that the white man has to do. Let's just read a stanza. I'm going to read it all. You can read it on your own. I'm just going to read this stanza. Take up the white man's burden. Send for the best ye breed. Go find your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. to wait in heavy harness, unfluttered folk and wild, your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. I mean, wow. It's all there, isn't it? The best ye breed, well, that's us, the fittest. Your captives they need us, even though they're our captives. Fluttered folk and wild, well, they're just like scared animals. And the killer line, your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. They are not adults. They are not our equals. They are demonic children. And it is our burden to rule them. This isn't just we're better than you. This is we're sacrificing our sons to help you, you ungrateful devilish children. This is the story that was told back home. This wasn't just art. This knowledge from the artists and writers and scholars became the truth. This is what politicians in London and Paris based their understanding of the colonies on. This is what the public consumed. It's a massive self-reinforcing feedback loop of fantasy that justifies anything. And now the ugly, the psychological impact. But this is the deepest, most tragic cut of all. Because this is the part of the story where the colonized start to believe it. This is what Frantz Fanon called the colonial neurosis. This isn't just about armies and banks. This is about conquering the mind. How do you do it? Well, you start with language. In colonial schools all over the world, children were forbidden from speaking their native languages. You were beaten, you were shamed, you were punished for speaking the language your mother and father spoke at home. You were taught that your language was primitive, guttural, uncivilized. The only language of intelligence, of power, of God was the colonizer's language. Then you teach them history. And you teach them that their history starts with the arrival of the European. In 1757, Lord Clive arrived in India, and the history of modern India begins. Everything before that, well, a dark time. A barbaric age of myth and superstition not worth studying. You teach them their art is crude, while your art is classic. You teach them their religion is paganism, while yours is the one true faith. You do this for generations, and what happens? You create the colonial subject. You create a person who is taught from birth to see their own culture, their own skin color, their own language, and their own history as inferior, as a source of shame. You create an aspirational class. The people who will bleach their skin. The people who will straighten their hair. The people who will change their names to sound more European. All in a desperate attempt to get closer to the ideal of the colonizer. An ideal, by the way, that they are never allowed to actually reach. Because the whole system is built on that, almost but not quite, that homie Baba will talk about. You can be like us, but you can never be us. This is the ugliest consequence of all. It's the creation of self-hatred as a tool of political control. The land can be given back. The stolen artifacts can, in theory, be returned. The economy can, in theory, be rebuilt. But the mind? The cultural bomb that Ngugi wa Thiong'o talked about, the one that annihilates a people's belief in their own names, in their own languages, in their own heritage, that is a wound that lasts for centuries. It's the most successful part of the entire colonial project. So that's our first part of the episode. I promised you it was going to be a very long episode, a very long deep dive. So if you just want to take a break now and listen to the rest later, it's up to you, but that's just the good part. That's the tower of justifications. It's a tower built on a divine mission, polished with a stone of reason and enlightenment, and decorated with scientific charts and exotic paintings that all say the same thing. We are better, they are less. This is for their own good. This is our burden. It's a story. Powerful, seductive, and unbelievably destructive story. And in part two of our episode for today, we're going to talk about what happens when the people at the bottom, half devil, half child people, look up at the tower and decide to pull the first brick. We're going to talk about the reckoning. So don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. All right, my friends, this is part two. The bad, the reckoning, the philosophy of post-colonialism. And this time, it's bad from the colonizer's perspective. This is the part of the movie where the monster they created turns around and looks them in the eye. This is the collapse of their whole carefully constructed worldview. This is the moment the subjects start talking back, and they're not asking politely. But it's also about the bad experiences, the pain, the generational trauma, and the sheer brutal badness of what it's like to live under that system. This part of the story is fueled by that pain. This is the intellectual, philosophical, and yes, the violent unraveling of the entire colonial project. So let's start by talking about the colonizer's tools. So how does the pushback start? Where does the first crack in the tower appear? In a plot twist that is just beautifully ironic, the unraveling starts when the colonized start using the master's own tools against them. The good idea, the liberating idea, is that the colonized people start to read. The colonizers, in their infinite wisdom, needed a local class of administrators. A comprador class, as it's sometimes called. They needed clerks, translators, and low-level bureaucrats to run the empire on the cheap. So they set up schools. And in these schools, they taught the best and brightest of the locals their own philosophy, their own literature. They taught them Shakespeare. They taught them Rousseau. They taught them Voltaire. They taught them Locke. And they especially taught them about the glorious French Revolution and the American Revolution. They taught them the sacred texts, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, the Declaration of Independence. And you have to imagine this bright young student in a colonial school in, say, Saint-Domingue, modern-day Haiti, or Calcutta or Saigon. He's reading this stuff, and his brow is furrowed. And he slowly raises his hand and says, "Excuse me, Professor, this is fantastic. I love this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Just wow, goosebumps. So, quick question. Does that include me?" And the professor just chokes on his tea. Because you see, the entire colonial project was built on the unstated, unwritten assumption that all men meant, well, all white men. The bad for the empire is that this move exposes their central, glaring, universe-sized hypocrisy. You cannot champion liberty, equality, and fraternity in Paris while you are practicing tyranny, inequality, and domination in Algiers. You cannot wax poetic about the rights of men in London while you are running a brutal, racist police state in Delhi and denying millions of people their most basic rights. The colonized subjects are the ones who hold the mirror up and say, "Your ideals are beautiful. We love them. We truly do. Now, live up to them." This is not a theoretical argument. This is exactly what happened. The most explosive, terrifying, and world-changing example, the Haitian Revolution. You've got the French Revolution kicking off in 1789. Liberty, equality, fraternity. The news reaches their most profitable colony, Saint-Domingue. It was, at the time, the richest colony in the world. A brutal sugar and coffee producing slave colony. It was a literal death camp. The average life expectancy for an enslaved African arriving there was 7 to 10 years. And the enslaved people and the free people of color hear the news from France. And they take it literally. And then you get a man named Toussaint Louverture, a formerly enslaved man. a brilliant, self-educated military and political genius. He had read the French Enlightenment philosophers. He read Renan, who wrote that a black Spartacus would one day rise up and avenge the enslaved. And Toussaint basically said, okay, I'll be that guy. He leads a massive slave revolt, an army of the enslaved, and they fight everyone. They fight the local white planters, they fight the Spanish, they fight a massive British invasion and win. And then they fight Napoleon. Napoleon, the heir to the revolution, sends his brother-in-law with his best troops, tens of thousands of them, to Saint-Domingue to crush this revolt and reinstitute slavery. And Toussaint's army, this army of formerly enslaved people, beats them. They beat Napoleon's elite troops. They fought for their literal freedom, using the very language of the revolution that was trying to re-enslave them. And in 1804, they declare independence. They create Haiti, the world's first black republic, the first nation founded by formerly enslaved people. You can imagine the sheer, pants-wetting terror this sent through every empire on earth. This was their worst nightmare come true. The tools had not only talked back, they had won. It's maybe the most successful, most radical revolution in modern history, and it's the one they never talk about. And you see this pattern repeated in different ways all over the world. Now let's jump to India, the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. The leaders of the Indian independence movement for decades were British-trained lawyers. Mahatma Gandhi, barrister, trained in London. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, barrister, trained in London. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, barrister, trained in London. They understood the British legal system inside and out. They understood British philosophy, and their entire initial strategy was one of liberal constitutionalism. They would go to the British Parliament and they would say, right, let's look at your own laws. Let's look at your own philosophy of self-government. By your own logic, you have no right to be here. They used the master's own self-proclaimed morality as their primary weapon. Gandhi's civil disobedience was a stroke of genius. The 1930 Salt March, it wasn't just a long walk. It was a brilliant piece of legal and moral theater. The British had a law, a salt monopoly. It was illegal for any Indian to make or collect their own salt. They had to buy it from the British, who taxed it heavily. Salt, the most basic element of life. So when Gandhi walked 240 miles to the sea and picked up a lump of salty mud, he was non-violently, peacefully, and publicly breaking an unjust law. But more than that, he was holding up the British hypocrisy for the entire world to see. He was saying, you, the nation of freedom and free trade, are arresting us for picking up salt from our own beaches. Make this make sense. And the British had no answer. Their only answer was violence. They beat the protesters, they arrested 60,000 people, and with every club-wielding policeman who beat a peaceful, non-resisting protester, the civilized mask of the benevolent despot slipped, revealing the brute underneath. It was a moral checkmate. They used the colonizer's own language, law, morality, freedom, to prove that the colonizer had none of those things. But this part of the story, it's not all polite debates in parliament. It's not just brilliant moral theater. The empires, as we just saw, do not just say, you got us. What a brilliant legal argument. Our mistake. Here are the keys. Terribly sorry for the last 200 years. Cheerio. Not at all. They fight back. They fight viciously. When their civilized mask is pulled off, they drop the pretense. They bring in the soldiers, they bring in the torture squads. They declare states of emergency that last for decades. They call the people asking for liberty terrorists. And this brings us to the part that makes everyone in the room just squirm. The part that gets this man's books put on watch lists to this day. We have to talk about Frantz Fanon. This, my friends, is where the reckoning gets bad in a very different way. This is about the pain. Now, who was Fanon? He's not an armchair philosopher. This is the most important part. He was a psychiatrist, a clinician. He was from the French colony of Martinique in the Caribbean, a colonial subject through and through. He fought for the Free French in World War II, was wounded, received a medal for bravery. He was, by all accounts, a good colonial subject. Then he goes to France, trains as a psychiatrist. And in the 1950s, he gets a job. He's sent to be the head of a psychiatric hospital in Algeria. During the height of the Algerian War of Independence, one of the most brutal, dirty, horrifying wars of the 20th century. And in his hospital, Fanon has to treat everyone. During the day, he's treating French soldiers, torturers, men who are having complete psychological breakdowns because of the atrocities they are committing. And at night, he is secretly treating their victims, the Algerian resistance fighters who have been tortured, often with electricity, water, and sexual violence. Fanon is sitting there in the middle of this hell as a doctor, and he's diagnosing the sickness. And he comes to a profound, earth-shattering conclusion. The entire system of colonialism is not just a political or economic system. It is a disease. It is a factory for mass-producing mental illness. This is his bad diagnosis. He writes his most famous book, The Wretched of the Earth. It's not a book, really. It's a diagnosis. It's a scream. It's an autopsy of the colonial mind. He picks up where Kipling left off. He says, okay, you've spent 100 years telling a man he's half devil and half child. You've told him his language is animal scratches, his gods are idols, his skin is a mark of shame, and his history is darkness. You have beaten him, you have lynched him, and you have dehumanized him at every possible turn. What? What do you think that does to a person's mind? He argues that colonialism is a system that works by inflicting deep, profound psychological trauma. It creates, in his words, an inferiority complex in the colonized. It's a neurosis. The colonized person is taught from birth to hate himself. And now the ugly. The ugly is Fanon's prescription. This is the part everyone quotes and usually misquotes. Fanon, the psychiatrist, observing his patients, makes a terrifying observation. He argues that for the colonized man, a man who has only ever been the object of violence, who has been beaten, tortured, and dehumanized his entire life, the only way to reclaim his stolen humanity is to become the subject of violence. He wrote the most controversial sentence in all of post-colonial theory. Violence is a cleansing force. People hear this and they think, oh, so he's an apostle of bloodshed. He just loves violence. No, you're missing the point. He's a psychiatrist making a clinical diagnosis. He's not saying violence is a great political strategy. He's saying this is what you, the colonizer, have done to us. You have backed us into a psychological corner where the only way for this traumatized, self-hating man to feel human again, to purge the inferiority complex you put in his brain, is to commit an act of violent resistance. It's the moment the child finally hits the abusive father back. In that one single act of rebellion, he destroys the hierarchy. He proves to himself that he is not an animal, that he is a man, an agent in the world who can act. It is heartbreaking, horrifying, and absolutely devastating analysis of the psychological damage of the system. He's not celebrating violence. He's mourning the fact that colonialism has made it the only medicine left in the cabinet. And he's not alone in this. His contemporary, the great poet Aimé Césaire, also from Martinique, by the way, Fanon was his student, wrote a book called Discourse on Colonialism. It's a long-form, satirical, angry, brilliant poem. And Césaire makes the flip side of Fanon's argument. He says, forget what colonialism does to the colonized for a second. Let's talk about what it does to the colonizer. He says that colonialism decivilizes the colonizer. It brutalizes him. It turns him into a barbarian to practice his barbarism on others. This is the boomerang effect. You can't be a civilized gentleman in Paris and a torturer in Algiers. You just can't. The barbarism you practice over there, it doesn't stay over forever. It comes home. Césaire's most famous line, he's writing this right after World War II, and he says, what is Nazism? What is the Holocaust? He says it is the supreme barbarism before which all the everyday barbarisms of colonialism pale. But he says, Europeans tolerated Nazism before it was inflicted on them. Why? Because they had been its accomplices for centuries. It was just colonialism applied to European peoples this time. The gas chambers, the concentration camps, Césaire argues that Europe had been practicing these techniques on brown and black people all over the globe for 100 years. Just didn't care. They only called it barbarism when the boomerang came back and hit them in the face. I mean, talk about a reckoning. These guys aren't just pulling a brick from the tower. They're planting dynamite at its foundations. So the empires are collapsing. The wars of liberation are being fought, and largely they are being won. New flags are being raised all over Africa and Asia. The old school guy in a pith helmet ruling you, colonialism, is dying. Hooray! We won, right? Well, the fight just, moves. It's like water. It moves from the physical battlefield to the mental battlefield, to the cultural battlefield. Because you can get the soldiers to leave. But what do you do about the library? What do you do about the universities? What do you do about the minds that have been colonized for 100 years? What do you do about the cultural bomb that Ngugi wa Thiong'o talked about? The physical empire is gone, but the intellectual empire is still standing. This is the good part of the reckoning. This is the birth of the new philosophers, the new lenses that let us finally deconstruct the master's library and understand how it was built. Now, this is where we get the big three of post-colonial theory. Now, first, we have to talk about Edward Said. So remember all the stuff we talked about in the first part, the scientific racism, the paintings of the lazy harems, the violent men with scimitars? Remember Kipling's half-devil, half-child? Well, in 1978, a Palestinian-American literary critic named Edward Said walked into this cultural museum, turned on all the lights, and showed that all the exhibits were fake. He wrote the book, the foundational text, Orientalism. He's the one who finally gave the monster a name. He went back through centuries of Western literature, art, scholarship, and political reports. And he proved, piece by piece, that this knowledge about the Orient, which is the Middle East, India, etc., was not objective, neutral truth. It was not understanding. It was a system of power. It was a fantasy, a stereotype, a creation that the West invented so it could control the East. By knowing the Orient as sensual, exotic, primitive, tyrannical, and irrational, the West could define itself as rational, civilized, progressive, and democratic. You can't control something you see as your equal. You first have to create it as your inferior. Said showed us that this body of knowledge was, in fact, an instrument of power. It was the intellectual justification for the colonial project. The experts on the Orient were the ones advising the politicians on how to rule it. It was a massive self-reinforcing feedback loop. This book, it's impossible to overstate its impact. It blew the doors off the hinges. It gave generations of scholars from colonized countries the language to explain what had been done to them. He named the monster. Okay, so that's Said. He's deconstructing the colonizer's library. But then, Just when the post-colonial intellectuals are starting to feel pretty good about themselves, writing their own histories, publishing their own novels, Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak walks into the room and asks a question that is, and I'm not exaggerating, a philosophical gut punch. She writes an essay called, "Can the Subaltern Speak?" First, what is the subaltern? Well, this one is a military term for a low-ranking officer. Spivak uses it to mean the most marginalized person, the person with no power, no platform, no voice. Think the poor, rural, illiterate, low-caste, colonized woman. The person at the absolute bottom of all the hierarchies. And Spivak's question is, can the person ever truly be heard? Or is she always spoken for? And this is where it gets really uncomfortable, because who is speaking for her? Well, first, the colonizer, obviously. We are here to save those poor brown women from their brutal brown men. Which is a classical colonial excuse, by the way. But also the nice, liberated, local high-caste intellectual man. And also the highly educated, Western university-trained, post-colonial feminist intellectual like Spivak herself. It is the most devastating check-your-privilege moment in all of academia. Spivak basically says, we intellectuals, in the very act of giving a voice to the voiceless, are we just silencing them all over again? Are we just replacing their reality with our theories about them? Are we just another kind of colonizer? She asks if this subaltern woman is doubly effaced, erased by the colonial project, and then erased again by the post-colonial intellectual project that claims to be saving her. It's a question that just stops you in your tracks. It forces you to ask, who is really telling the story? And who is being left out? It's a question we still have no good answer for. Okay, so we've got Said deconstructing the outside and Spivak asking who gets to speak on the inside. And then we get Homi K. Bhabha. And then you get Homi K. Bhabha. And this is the weird, messy, complicated, and kind of fun part. Bhabha looks at the whole colonial encounter and basically says, you're all looking at this as a simple us versus them, colonizer versus colonized. It's not that clean. He says the colonial space is a messy space. It's not pure British culture over here and pure Indian culture over there. The second they touch, they contaminate each other. They create a new in-between space. He gives us two amazing must-know ideas. The first is hybridity. Bhabha says that colonialism is never a simple imposition. It's a translation. And translations are never perfect. The colonizer tries to imprint his culture, but it gets all mixed up with the local culture. And the local culture, in turn, observes and changes the colonizer's culture. The result? A hybrid. A new thing. It's not British and it's not Indian. It's Anglo-Indian. It's the curry that becomes the national dish of Britain. It's the Queen's English being spoken with a billion different accents and vocabularies that would make the Queen's head spin. It's a third space that is new. And here's the key. It's uncontrollable by the colonizer. It's a form of resistance that just happens. And the second idea? Oh, this is my absolute favorite. This is the chef's kiss of resistance. It's called mimicry. Bhabha points out that the colonizer has a contradictory demand. He wants the colonized subject to be like him, be civilized, be educated, be like me. But there's a crucial unstated rule. Be like me, but not exactly like me. He wants you to be, in Bhabha's famous phrase, almost the same, but not quite. Or almost the same, but not white. And he said that too, by the way. Why? Because if the colonized subject perfectly mimicked the colonizer, if he became indistinguishable from the colonizer, then the entire justification for colonialism would collapse. If the child is now an adult, the father has no more right to rule him. So the system is built on this almost but not quite gap. And this is where the colonized person finds their power. They mimic the colonizer perfectly. Well, too perfectly. They wear the wig and the powder. They wear the three-piece suit in the 100-degree jungle heat. They learn the accent. They quote Shakespeare better than the colonizer. And this act of perfect mimicry is actually an act of mockery. It's the most subversive, passive-aggressive form of resistance ever. It's parody. It's holding up a mirror and saying, "Look at you. Look how ridiculous you are." It exposes the colonizer's authority as a performance. It's just a set of clothes and a funny way of talking. And by mimicking it, the colonized person reveals its emptiness. It's no longer superiority. It's just a costume. That terrifies the colonizer. He's not in on the joke. He just feels mocked. He feels his authority slipping. So, that's the reckoning, my friends. We went from the colonized using the master's own words, liberty and equality, to demand their freedom. We went into the darkness with Fanon, who diagnosed colonialism as a sickness and violence as the horrifying cleansing medicine. And we came out into the library with Said, Spivak, and Baba, the intellectual demolition crew who are still, to this day, taking apart the master's house brick by brick. The physical empires are gone. The intellectual empires are still being dismantled. So the story's over, right? We won. The world is post-colonial, right? Well, what if the system didn't die? What if it just mutated? What if it just put on a nice suit, got a job at a bank, and started talking about globalization and development aid? Well, that, my friends, that is our third part of this episode, and that's the ugly part, the part we're still in. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to talk about the third part. I'm going to talk about the ugly, the new system, the philosophy of neo-colonialism. I'll be right back. All right, my friends, this is the ugly truth. Political independence did not mean true freedom. It looked like freedom. There was a new flag. There was a new prime minister, often a celebrated liberation hero. There was a seat at the United Nations. But as the champagne was being poured, the old masters were quietly handing the new leaders a stack of bills. And they were saying, "I'm so glad you're in charge now. By the way, you will be inheriting all the debts from the colonial administration. And your entire economy? It's still built to do one thing. Export all your valuable stuff to us at our prices. Don't change that. It works so well for us. Anyway, congrats on the independence." This is, my friends, is neo-colonialism. It's the ghost in the machine. It's the persistence of the colonial system, just without the overt political control. It's colonialism by other means: economic, cultural, and financial. Now let's start with the good, the disguise, aid and globalization. Now the theme here is the great pivot. Control shifted from flags and soldiers to banks and boardrooms. And just like old school colonialism, this new system needed a good story, a justification. And what's the new good claim? We're not your rulers, we're your partners. We're here to help you develop. Well, this is the age of international aid. It's foreign investment, it's free trade, it's globalization. We're all in this together. We're going to bring you, our newly independent friend, into the modern global economy. We're going to lend you money to build your new nation. It all sounds so nice, well, so helpful. The bad is that this was a trap. And the man who saw it coming, the man who literally coined the term, was Kwame Nkrumah. Nkrumah was the first president of independent Ghana. He was a liberation hero. And almost immediately after winning independence in 1957, He looked around and realized something was deeply wrong. In 1956, he wrote the book. He called it Neo-Colonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. He didn't pull any punches with that title. And in it, he laid out the perfect definition. He said a neo-colonial state is one that is, in theory, independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. But its economic system, and thus its political policy, is directed from outside. He saw the game. The methods are different. The result is the same. The result is the continued extraction of wealth from the global south to the global north. So what are the ugly tools of this new polite imperialism? Say hello to your new best friends, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. Those two institutions were born in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. Their good mission was to rebuild the war-torn global economy and promote stability. Well, that's a noble goal, right? But how do they work in this new post-colonial world? It went like this. A new country is born, well, let's call it Freedom Land. Freedom Land is poor. Its old colonial masters spent 100 years only building infrastructure that got rubber or cocoa or copper out of the country. They didn't build schools. They didn't build hospitals. They didn't build local industries. The new president of Freedom Land says, we need to build our nation. We need schools. We need roads, hospitals, and power plants. But he has no money. So in walk the nice men in suits from the World Bank and the IMF. We hear you need to build your nation. We love that. Here, take this massive loan, $1 billion. Go nuts. Build that dam. And Freedom Land says, well, this is great. Thank you. And they signed the papers. And then, a few years later, a few things happen. Maybe the price of rubber on the global market, which, by the way, is set in London or New York, suddenly crashes. Or maybe the first president turns out to be a friendly dictator that the West propped up because he was anti-communist. And he just, steals half the loan money and puts it in a Swiss bank account. This, by the way, is called odious debt. Debt illegally incurred by a regime that doesn't benefit the people, but which the people are forced to pay back after he's gone. That's a true thing. Now, Freedom Land, of course, can't pay the interest on its loan. They're in default. And the IMF comes back. But this time, they're not smiling like the first time. They say, friend, you've mismanaged your finances. You're in trouble. But we're still your partners. We're going to help you. We will restructure your debt. We will give you new loans so you can pay off the interest on your old loans. This, by the way, is literally what loan sharks do. Exactly what they do. It's the debt trap. But the IMF says this time, it's not like last time. There are conditions. We're not just going to give you the money. You have to prove you're fiscally responsible. You have to agree to our Structural Adjustment Program. SAPs or SAPs. Structural Adjustment Programs. My friend, these three words are arguably responsible for more human suffering in the late 20th century than any army in the modern history of the world. It sounds so boring, I know. Oh, we're just adjusting the structure. It's an accounting term, right? It's not an accounting term. It is a weapon. Here is what an SAP forced these independent nations to do in exchange for the loans they needed to just survive. 1. Massive cuts to public spending. The IMF would say, your government is bloated. You're spending too much. What's the first thing to get cut? Healthcare and education. They would literally force countries to fire teachers and close rural clinics as a condition of the loan. They called it austerity. So the brand new schools and hospitals the liberation government promised its people, they are immediately defunded. Number 2, privatization of state-owned assets. The IMF would say, your government shouldn't be in the business of, business. That's inefficient socialism. So, as a condition of the loan, Freedom Land must privatize its state-owned assets. Now, what does that mean? It means selling off your national water system, your national electric grid, your national phone company, your national airline. And who had the capital to buy these massive national assets? Well, not the people of Freedom Land. It was foreign multinational corporations. So a French corporation now owns your water. An American corporation owns your electricity. A British corporation owns your telecommunications. And they, of course, immediately raise the prices on your own citizens to extract a profit, which then send back to Paris, New York, or London. That's not everything. 3. Free trade liberation. Well, this one sounds really good, right? Free trade. Who doesn't love that? What it means was you must remove all your protectionist tariffs and subsidies. So Freedom Land's tiny, brand new baby shoe factory, it can't compete. It's suddenly forced to compete with no protections against Nike or Adidas. Or more to the point, freelance farmers? They've been growing, let's say, corn for their own people. The government gave them a small subsidy to help them. The IMF says, nope, cut that subsidy. And at the same time, the US and Europe are massively subsidizing their own farmers. And they still do, by the way. So heavily subsidized American corn dumped on the global market for less than it costs to grow floods Freedom Land. The local farmers go bankrupt. The country, which used to feed itself, is now 100% dependent on foreign food imports to survive. This is not an accident. I will repeat that. This is not an accident. This is policy. But that's also not everything. There's number 4. Focus on export-oriented, single-crop economies. Finally, the IMF says, to pay us back, you need cash, right? Hard currency, dollars, euros. You're not going to get that selling corn to your own people. You know what you're good at? Growing cocoa. So stop wasting all that land on food for your people. Turn all your best agricultural land over to growing cocoa for export. So what happens? The country has no food, and its entire national economy now depends on the one single price of one single commodity, which is still set in London and New York. That, my friend, that is neo-colonialism. It's a trap. It's a system of remote control. It's independence, but you can't fund your schools. It's independence, but a corporation in Paris owns your water. It's independence, but you can't feed your own people. It's independence, but your entire economy is held hostage by the price of cocoa. It is exactly the old colonial model, the exact same function. Extract raw materials, crush local industry, and send the wealth to the West. They just found a way to do it without the expense of all those soldiers and viceroys. They just get you to do it yourself. It's brilliant. And it is desperately, tragically ugly. And now let's talk about the new civilizing mission. It's not just money in banks, right? That's the hard power of neocolonialism. But what about the soft power? What about the culture? What about the minds? Well, the civilizing mission got a rebrand too. The good claim? We are spreading democracy. We are spreading human rights. We are creating a global culture. This sounds fantastic. Who doesn't want democracy and human rights? Only a fool would say no to that. But the bad reality? This is cultural and intellectual imperialism. Now let's start with democracy. This was the big sales pitch, especially during the Cold War. Join our side, the free world, and you'll get democracy. Now, what did that mean in practice? It meant you can freely elect any leader you want as long as it's the leader we approve of. If you happen to elect someone, let's say a socialist, who says, you know what, I think our oil should belong to our people and not to a British or American oil company, well, that's the wrong kind of democracy, my friends, and then you get a coup. You get the CIA or MI6 or the KGB. You get covert operations. You get Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, a democratically elected Pan-Africanist hero, assassinated and replaced by Mobutu Sese Seko, a cartoonishly corrupt, leopard skin hat wearing monster of a dictator who ruled and looted his country for 30 years with the full-throated military and financial backing of the West. Why? Because he was anti-communist. He let our corporations have the mines. That was the democracy on offer. It was a loyalty test. And then there's the cultural part. This is the part we just live in. It's not evil. It's just overwhelming. It's the sheer saturation of the global media landscape with Western, primarily American stuff. It's Hollywood. It's pop music. It's Levi's jeans. It's Coca-Cola. It's the default setting for cool. It's the default setting for success. It's not that an American blockbuster is bad. Not at all. It's that the American blockbuster plays in every cinema in Lagos and in Lima and in Lahore, and the local filmmaker with a local story can't get their film funded or distributed in their own city. It's like what we said in part 1. It's like trying to grow a seedling in the shadow of a giant redwood. It's not a fair fight. It's an economic crushing of local culture. But this leads to the intellectual control. Now, this is the subtle, lingering idea left over from the old colonial project. That real knowledge, serious philosophy, important science, and great art still comes from the West. Oh, you're a writer? Have you been published in New York? Or you're a scientist? Have you been published in a leading journal in London? Or you're a real intellectual? Well, good. Did you go to Harvard, Oxford, the Sorbonne? The validation for your own culture's intelligence still has to come from the old master. And this brings us to the ugly consequence. The most tragic, heartbreaking part of the entire post-independence story. It's the creation of the new elite, the decolonized elite. Remember in part 1 we talked about how the British and French created a small local class of administrators, taught them their language, taught them their ways? Well, what happened to them after independence? They took over. Frantz Fanon also saw this coming. He warned about it in The Wretched of the Earth. He called them the national bourgeoisie. He said, the great tragic danger is that the revolution will be betrayed. The national bourgeoisie, the local elite, the rich families, the one who had been educated in London and Paris, they don't dismantle the colonial system. They just take the colonizer's place. They move into the colonizer's fancy houses. They take over the administration. They run the same system of extraction. They run the export-driven economy. They run the mines and the plantations. They just keep the profit for themselves and they stash it in the same Swiss bank accounts the colonizers used. They become, in Fanon's words, the transmission line between their nation and the global neo-colonial system. They are the local managers for the global corporation. They have no interest in decolonizing anything. They have no interest in building up their own people. They are profiting from the exact same system that enslaved their grandparents. They are the new comprador class. They serve the global market, not their own people. They speak English or French at their dinner parties. They send their kids to boarding school in Switzerland. And they use the language of nationalism and independence and our culture to fool the masses, while they are literally selling the country out from under them. This is the great, ugly post-colonial tragedy. So, my friends, let's talk about the new liberation. I know, that's a lot. This is a dark picture. It's a system of economic traps, propped-up dictators, cultural saturation, and betrayed revolutions. It's easy to just give up. To say, well, the system won, and the house always wins. But the fight isn't over. It just mutated again. The reckoning isn't over. It just got smarter. This is the good part. This is the new liberation. the ongoing modern fight against these neo-colonial structures. The fight is no longer just about flags and parliaments. The fight is about decolonizing everything. It's about decolonizing your mind. And the great prophet of this is another writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Ngugi is a brilliant Kenyan novelist. For the first part of his career, he wrote in English. He was celebrated. He was a great African writer. And in the 1970s, he had a crisis. He realized he was doing exactly what the colonial system wanted. He was an English novelist. He was writing his people's stories in the language of the colonizer for an audience in London and New York. The actual peasants and workers in his own village in Kenya, well, they couldn't read his books, let alone afford buying them. So he made a revolutionary decision. He stopped writing his novels and plays in English. He started writing in his native language. His book about this is called Decolonizing the Mind. And he calls the English language in Africa the cultural bomb. He says the cultural bomb is the real weapon of colonialism. Its effects is to annihilate a people's belief in their names, in their languages, in their environment, in their heritage of struggle, in their unity, in their capacities, and ultimately in themselves. It makes them see their past as a wasteland of non-achievement. And so, his act of writing in his native language, it's not sentimental. It's not quaint. It's a revolutionary act. It's not an act of building. It's saying my language, this language you called primitive and uncivilized and beat out of my grandparents, is worthy of high art. It is worthy of complex philosophy. It's worthy of a great novel. It is a refusal to use the master's tools. It is an act of rebuilding the wasteland that the cultural bomb created. For this, by the way, he was arrested and imprisoned by the decolonized neo-colonial government of Kenya, who of course ran their entire country in English. This is happening everywhere. This is the decolonizing knowledge movement. This is the fight to say, hey, all that indigenous knowledge that you called pagan superstition and primitive voodoo for 500 years, the traditional ecological knowledge about how to manage a forest, the sustainable farming techniques, the plant-based medicines? Well, funny story. It turns out that the 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity is on land managed by indigenous people. It turns out that your scientific model of progress, industrial monoculture farming, clear-cutting forests, is literally killing the planet. And our primitive superstition is actually a highly complex, sophisticated, multi-generational science of sustainability. So, who's primitive now? Decolonizing knowledge is about respect. It's about saying that a university in London is not the only place knowledge is made. That knowledge also lives in the stories of a village elder, in the language of a tribe, in the practices of a farmer. And this leads us to the big new fight, the 21st century fight. It's the fight for sovereignty, real sovereignty. It's in the modern movements demanding debt forgiveness. This is the global south finally looking at the IMF and the World Bank and saying, we are not paying this. The debt is not real. It's the price of our own chains. It's odious debt you gave to dictators you installed. We're not going to sacrifice another generation of our children's education and healthcare to pay the interest on your fake criminal loans. It's in the call for fair trade, not free trade. It's saying I'm not going to be your cocoa colony anymore. I'm going to set a fair price for my goods, and I'm going to process my own cocoa. I'm not just going to sell you the raw bean for pennies so you can turn it into a $10 chocolate bar in Switzerland. I'm going to make the chocolate bar here. It's in the call for data sovereignty. This is the newest one. It's asking, what is the new raw material of the 21st century? Well, it's data. And who is extracting all the data from our countries? Who owns the clouds? Who is building the AI models? Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft. Is big tech just the new East India Company? Are we all just data colonies now? And finally, the biggest fight of all, climate justice. This this is the final perfect devastating boomerang effect that MSSR talked about. This is the ultimate reckoning. Let's just lay it out. The global north, Europe and North America, got rich, well, how? By having an industrial revolution. How did they fuel that revolution? With coal and with raw materials taken from their colonies. This industrialization, burning all that carbon, caused to a great extent climate change. Now, who's bearing the brunt of the worst effects of climate change? Who's getting the worst of the droughts, the worst of the floods, the worst of the superstorms? Whose lands are literally disappearing under the rising seas? It is the global south. It is the very same countries that were colonized. It is the final injustice. You stole our stuff to get rich. The process of you getting rich broke the planet's atmosphere, and now we are the ones who are paying the price for it. So the new liberation movement says, we are not coming to you for aid. We're not coming to you for charity to help us adapt to the mess you made. We are coming to you for reparations. You owe us a climate debt. You broke it. You bought it. It's time to pay the bill. That is the unfinished fight. So, that's the ride I promised you today, my friends. I know it's a long ride and it's a bumpy ride at best, but that's the story. We went from part 1, the good, the overt, justified, God and science on our side, domination of colonialism. We went on to part 2, the bad, the critical, painful, violent, and intellectual unraveling of that system, the reckoning of post-colonialism. And we ended here in part 3, the ugly, the sneaky, polite, suit and tie, the bank will see you now system of economic and cultural control that is neo-colonialism. I think the most important thing to realize is that the good, the bad, and the ugly are not a neat linear timeline. It's not like colonialism ended and then post-colonialism happened and now we are only in neo-colonialism. It's all still here. They are all happening at the same time. These philosophies and systems are not in the past. They are overlapping. They coexist. You still hear the good justifications today. You still hear people say, well, colonialism wasn't all bad. I mean, they built the trains. Ignoring, of course, that the trains were built by brutalized local labor only to get the stolen raw materials to the port faster. That's it. You still have the bad of the post-colonial reckoning. The theories of Said and Spivak and Fanon are more important right now than ever as we try to understand our world. And you are living in the ugly of the neo-colonial system every time you buy a t-shirt or watch a movie or pay your electricity bill or read a headline about IMF negotiations or the climate crisis. This story, my friends, is not over. Liberation, it turns out, is not a single event. It's not a holiday on the calendar. It's not a destination you arrive at. It's a process. It's a verb. It's the constant, messy, difficult, and absolutely necessary philosophical and political work of becoming, and more than anything, of unlearning. Well, in this first episode, we talked about the philosophy of colonialism. Next time, we're going to focus more on history. You don't want to miss that. Thanks for hanging out, but I highly encourage you to go think about it. And of course, I'm always there to start a conversation about this on my Patreon page. You can go there. You don't have to pay anything, only if you want to support me. But you can become a free member on my Patreon page and we can discuss anything you want about this or about any of the other topics that I talk about. I'm Danny, and that was a new episode from English Plus Podcast, one from our long and deep dive series into the world of colonialism and, of course, what comes after it. Again, thank you very much for listening. I will see you again next time. And remember, never stop learning with English Plus Podcast.